Way before Golden Era, and way before the Mini Cupper build, and way before 850 Project, and even way before Yippee Cayenne, there was an original FCP Euro build that served one purpose, and it was to get FCP Euro on the racetrack. And without that original build, you may not have seen some of the other YouTube series that we've done, all the various other projects we've gotten into. Today, we're finally going to take a look at one of my personal favorite project cars, and the one that started it all for FCP Euro, both in the build realm and on the racetrack, the 2010 W204 C300 that we campaigned in the American Endurance Racing Series. So this car right here, it's relatively unique in its construction, but it's not all that different from one that you still might go and find on your public roads, or even one that you might be daily driving at home. This is a 2010 Mercedes C300. It's running a 3-liter M272 V6 that honestly doesn't have a lot done to it. Endurance racing, of course, like any form of racing, you want to be fast, and that's a big part of being out on the racetrack, but a really important element is because the car is turning laps for hours on end, you need reliability. If you're not finishing the race, you're not winning anything. This car, the M272 V6, and the driveline behind it that we're going to talk about momentarily, is really robust and really strong for Mercedes, and it allowed this car to be hugely successful even though it wasn't necessarily the fastest car on track. It does make about 220 horsepower in stock trim and similar torque. It's not the fastest car out there. It's equivalent to something like an E46. Does pack a little bit more weight, but what it does lack in straight line speed, it makes up for in stopping power with a ton of grip, and in my opinion, one of my favorite parts, the exhaust note. This car sounds ridiculous. This is a sport model, and one of the parts that makes this car really special in particular, and one reason we hunted for this car specifically, it does come with a factory 6-speed manual, not a whole bunch of those out there, but makes this a really cool car. But what we're going to do now is pop the hood. Like I said, in here, not a ton that's that different from your general C300 W204 chassis, or even some of the other cars that sported this engine. It's a 3-liter. At the front, you will notice there is kind of a lot more space than you'd usually be used to. Secondary air injection pump has been deleted on this. One of the bigger things is if you actually look under this engine cover, which kind of hidden away in front, you'll notice that the intake manifold is actually black composite. This was our original guinea pig for the M014 composite intake manifold swap. That is, of course, an upmarket retrofit that eliminates all of the runner flaps in the intake manifold. It upsizes the throttle body. It's a way to get a lot more air into the engine and give you a lot more power on the top end. If you have an M272, it's one of the only ways that you can get more power out of that engine besides getting crazy and investing a ton of money. It's a really feasible one, and it uses all OEM parts. Another big one that you're going to notice is just very non-factory looking is right over here. With Mercedes, a lot of their cars are going to integrate both the ABS system and the traction control system together. So if one wheel starts spinning, a lot of the Mercedes cars don't have limited slips from the factory, and even if they do, the way that that power is modulated and distributed is through quick actuation of the rear brake calipers. That's not ideal for motorsport because you kind of want the differential to be able to sort things out. This car does have a limited slip conversion. We will talk about that, but a big factor was getting an ABS system that could kind of think for itself and act appropriately when it's at the limits of traction or adhesion. So this car is actually running a split. A lot of the brains of the car still hooked up to this original ABS module, but you'll notice all of these lines that are kind of flopping around in the engine bay are actually coming off of an E46 Mark 60 ABS system. This is something like an E46 M3. It's considered one of the gold standards of like streetable, track-ready ABS, and it really woke this car up in the manner that it became a proper track car. One of the big party pieces, though, of all of the non-standard things in here is going to be these coilovers. We're going to talk about these a little more once we get under the car. These are a 2-way adjustable damper. They were perfect. They fit the bill. We also were able to get camber plates in here. Huge factor, getting the proper race car alignment made a huge difference on this car, as well as you can see it's cut a little bit here just so you can give freedom of adjustment, but we've also shifted the tower itself over and inwards. Sometimes when you're racing, especially endurance racing, you kind of make fixes as you have to. And one of our favorite pieces is if you look down in here, we actually had a bit of a cooling situation at one of the racetracks. You'll notice that this water neck is rather interesting down here, and that is a jack handle that we actually chopped in half, welded in, made it work. So down one jack handle, but up one cooling system. Joining me in the interior here, this is where you're probably going to see the most modification to this specific car. All of this obviously is going to be very much driver-centric, whether it's for safety, for comfort, or just for endurance racing in general. I mean, a really good example, you have this tiny Sparco steering wheel right in front of me here. It's a much shorter steering ratio than the big factory bulky steering wheel. We do also have an AIM MXL2 digital dashboard to relay information to the driver. It is also relaying the same information. The cluster does still work, but tying back to those earlier things I was pointing out with the ABS, we want a lot more of the information that this AIM is able to give us, and it's able to give us very detailed data on everything going on in the car, oil temperature, oil pressure, things that the factory Mercedes ECU wouldn't have been able to inform us of, which is, again, really important when you're doing much longer format races. Moving down a little bit, of course, you see I'm in a big, bulky Halo style seat. Safety regulations for the class include these, as well as this very, very well-built racing grade roll cage. Obviously, a W204, especially here in the United States, you can't exactly just buy a bolt-in roll cage. Not all that many people are out here racing them, so this one had to be done entirely from scratch. It does go behind the dashboard. It's a really nice cage, but you need that level of safety when you're going to be out on track with a bunch of other cars, especially when you're racing for as long as you are in this series. Moving down, we have a Race Capture Pro 3. That is the data and telemetry system that was used in this car at the time. A little bit outdated now, but at the time it was one of the go-tos. Moving towards my pedal box, I have a totally factory C300 Sport Package pedal box. No need to change it, works perfectly. We do have a factory Mercedes 716.6 6-speed manual transmission. One thing worth noting, it's not known for having the most precise throws. It's just kind of the nature of owning a Mercedes manual gearbox because of the fact that they don't make all that many, but one clever one was they have a ball, a pivot ball. This linkage is very similar to your standard BMW one. We drilled a new hole and moved the pivot ball upwards, so you get a short throw shifter. Very clever. We do have a Lifeline fire suppression system in here. It goes all the way around, as well as, of course, more importantly, under the hood. You'll notice there's a bunch of slats running across this windshield. That's actually a defrosting system, just like you'd normally have in the rear glass of your car. Why is it in the front windshield? Well, like I've kind of been saying, endurance racing stops really for no one. If it's raining, if it's cold, if it's foggy, you're still gonna have to be out there turning laps. So you run that defroster on the inside so that you're making sure you have visibility all the time. All right, so that'll cover pretty much everything under the hood and inside of the car that make this W204 very special. Now we're going to hop underneath and talk about some of the goodies in the suspension, brakes, wheel well area, as well as the driveline of this car. All right, so over here at the front of the car, we kind of have a lot to talk about. Most of the Mercedes you're ever going to find are going to have a wheel bolt rather than a wheel stud, but when you're doing things like pit stops or quick swaps in the paddock, you're going to really want to have these studs just because it makes it a lot easier to throw a nut on. Now, you'll notice there's a big party piece right over here, besides the two-piece floating brake rotor, which is great for cooling and track use. This giant brake caliper, when we were rolling into Golden Era, we kind of had a little bit of R&D under our belt from this car way back in the day, because as we started trying to figure out what kind of braking artillery we needed for the series, we started to toy around with retrofitting upmarket parts onto this car. So what you're seeing is a W204 C63 brake caliper. That is 100% true, and the disc, of course, is made to fit a C63 as well. But there's a little bit more behind it than that. This front spindle has actually been swapped to a C63 front spindle, just like we did on the Golden Era build, if you recall. A big part of that is, yes, to bolt the caliper on to accommodate the brake, but it also uses a captured wheel bearing style, which means the bearing itself and the hub are integrated. You bolt them onto the hub. Huge for a race car because it makes it a lot easier to swap wheel bearings, which is a wear item on any race car, especially when running sticky tires like these. But it's also a lot stronger and more durable than something that is a press fit or is otherwise held on in a different manner. So in the suspension department, you'll see we do have some coilovers here, and these are actually going to be custom-made Sachs coilovers that we had Sachs make totally from scratch for us for this C300. As you can see, custom spring rates in the back. We'll get to that in a minute here, but we're running a true coilover rather than a spring alongside in your typical multi-link setup. And this was kind of version 1 for this car. We did toy with a couple of different things. We eventually actually switched over to a Bilstein Club Sport coilover. Those are actually the very same ones that you see us use in the Golden Era series. Those also did really well for us, but the Sachs that you do see in front of us here, that was the original V1 suspension coilover design that we used on our C300 in competition. So also behind all of this brake ducting here that's going to the inside of the rotor, we have one of the party pieces of this car, in my opinion. Another great example of our R&D that we kind of did with this car with the Synchro Design Works monoball thrust arm. So these cars, as well as a lot of Mercedes post around 2002, 2003, are going to use a two-piece control arm system. So you have a typical rearward control arm, or just a general, more common control arm. And then you're going to have the thrust arm up front, or the forward control arm. We found when we were racing, because these are rubber bushings, it's very, very common that they'll begin to flex a ton under the limit, especially with a sticky tire. So what we did is, because they were moving around so much, Synchro Design Works machined us a monoball insert that goes into the normal control arm, and it holds that thing steady. And not only does it mean that our alignment isn't constantly gaining and changing toe as we're driving the car around the track, but more importantly, what it does mean is this does not wear. Because of the fact that a monoball can flex exactly as much as is needed versus a rubber bushing that's going to be getting shoved all over the place, this guy's been on here since we installed it, and it shows no signs of ever needing to come off. So moving to the rear of the car now, of course, same sort of deal, wheels and tires, as well as the studs, and also the brakes. These are also stolen from a W204 C63. It just makes things easy, not only, of course, because of the fact that it's a relatively easy bolt-on upgrade, as we found at the time, but also because it makes pads and master cylinder really easy. If you're using matched brake sets, a lot of the time it's going to move the same amount of fluid when you actually hit the brake pedal, so you can just run a C63 brake master cylinder, or in this case, just the factory one for this car, and it's not going to affect your pedal travel all that much, even when you do switch to these much bigger calipers, because they have smaller pistons than the original one would have. Weapon of choice for front and rear on this guy were the Pagid RSL 29s, also known as the yellow ones. If you're in the Pagid realm a lot, we do sell them for a bunch of cars on our site, whether it's Porsches, Mercedes, etc. One of the weapons of choice for anyone doing track duty. They're durable, they're great, they're super heat resistant. Super funky over here, if you look, we actually have a true coilover in the rear of this car. It is actually stitched and tied into the roll cage. Normally you wouldn't want to do this on a street car because of the fact that there is the added risk that it's putting extra strain on the inside of where the shock is mounting, but because this is all reinforced, it was good to go, and then we get an actual true coilover back here, which is a huge gain when it comes to alignment changes and things like that under load. Otherwise, the rear arms, pretty much just refurbished. The one big one is right up top. We have just a general aftermarket camber arm, so we get that adjustment. But stock toe arms and everything like that, nothing too crazy, just using the eccentric bolt at the back to move things around as you would. Going to kind of close things out here. We do have an upgraded rear sway bar. I believe this is an Eibach and just standard OE end links, Lemforders right off of our site, nothing crazy. If you look up towards the coilover over here, this is where that multi-link spring would normally sit in its bucket, which is integrated into this big lower control arm here. Of course, it's moved out, so now we just have empty space up there in this instance, but otherwise, this is all mostly factory-ish for the most part. This is a stock W204 C300 differential. Of course, if you wanted a limited slip, just like we did for this car, you could go down the rabbit hole of something like a P31 package W204 C63 limited slip, just bolt right in to the subframe. But a big factor in this was that we did want a quick locking limited slip, as well as one with a relatively short ratio to leverage all 220 horsepower as much as we could. So if I recall correctly, this car may be using an ML Mercedes W164 ring gear itself inside the 215 millimeter housing for the differential itself. It is also running a Quaife limited slip. Big upgrade for any car, but especially one of these Mercedes that didn't come with a limited slip. It's one of the most important things when it comes to putting power down, handling, overall chassis dynamics. It's one of the best upgrades you can do. We have our Y-pipe merging after the secondaries, bringing things down to the single exit. These are the secondary cats. Well, sometimes people just think of these as more of a resonator because they're not doing a whole bunch, but someone has come in here and filled this transmission mount with 3M window weld, it looks, which is an age-old trick. It's a hard polyurethane. When it cures, it's a great way to stiffen things up. It's just very much a DIYer approach to making a race car. You start to see a lot of the same tones that we've kind of brought to the products that you find on our website. I mean, a really good example, one of our most popular Mercedes upgrades that you guys have probably seen or may even have in your car from basically the last decade from us is engine mounts. So these specifically are W204 C63 engine mounts. This isn't a C63, but we did figure out they would fit. They're a little stiffer, they're a little bit more wear adverse than the stock mounts, which will flex around a lot. But it's kind of the same spirit that we would use to build out a lot of our other retrofit stuff that you can find from Mercedes. A really popular one being the Black Series, CLK63 Black Series engine mount retrofit kit that we sell on our website. It's another great example of one that we tried, tested, found them more durable, found them a little bit stiffer, but also complacent for a road car where it's not going to add a ton of vibration to your car. So once we had proved things out, tried it ourselves, listed it for sale, and it's been a favorite of yours. So as you can see, there's not really a whole lot to this thing. And it's obviously built for a specific race class and is built to do a specific thing, but it's really a good testament to the fact that you don't need to do that much to get out there and start doing motorsport things or start doing racing things in general. I mean, a good set of brakes, a good set of tires, and maybe some suspension mods, and you're out there starting to learn for yourself and starting to kind of experience what that world is like. And that's really what this car was for us. I mean, from here we ran this car, and then we jumped into TCR with our Mark 7s, and then we went into IMSA with our AMG GT4 twins, and we kind of launched our motorsport program from this build specifically. And then of course, we have all of the builds that we bring you today for the exact same reason that this car exists. Not only to figure out kind of the intricacies of these strange chassis that no one else is modifying, most importantly, learning how to support you in your projects and making this feasible for you to go out and do yourselves. Of course, the builds are going to continue so we can keep bringing you that sort of knowledge on our site, on YouTube, all of these things to support you in your projects. So make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you with the next build or the next project very soon.